is an offence to do anything at all in terms of cannabis, to possess it, to use it, to grow it, to sell it, to create some kind of medicinal product, turning some leaf and flower into an oil, for example, is an act of manufacturing an illegal drug. So all of those activities are criminalised, and depending on the nature of the offence, that is a possession offence compared to a large-scale supply offence, the offence might cause you a little bit of trouble in the legal sense, or a lot of trouble in the sense of long jail terms. Certainly at the high end of supply, large-scale cultivation, commercial supplies, jail time is what happens to you. At the user end, if I put it that way, people who are users often will be a long, long way away from going to jail. So the courts then get to interpret what that means, but it's not a question for the courts. I was having a conversation a few minutes ago. It's not a matter for the courts to say, oh, we don't like that law, we'll change it. Courts have to interpret the law and apply the law. The interpretation of the law sometimes has an impact on how laws are enforced, but primarily it's legislation. And that means, in one sense, that it's easy to change, except it's not easy clinically. But it would be quite simple in a legal sense, or a constitutional sense, if you like, for the New South Wales Parliament and any other parliament in other state to pass a law to make cannabis legal for whatever purpose. Despite all the announcements about medicinal cannabis now being legal, there's been umpteen announcements over the last few years, it is for practical purposes not legally available. The law changed in New South Wales and on a federal level in 2016, so it doesn't seem that long ago, but here we are, 18 months or so ago, to allow doctors to, I think most people were here for the earlier sessions with Therese and Deb talking about some of that, and particularly Therese's experience, to allow doctors to go through a process to prescribe medicinal cannabis. As far as I know, nobody, could be wrong, nobody has yet been able to get through that process and be legally prescribed cannabis in New South Wales. Might be different in other states, but I haven't heard of anybody in New South Wales, one exception I'll come back to in a minute, who's gone through that process that Therese was talking about, applying through New South Wales Health and the TGA to get legal permission for a doctor to prescribe cannabis to a patient. Can't happen. Can happen, hasn't happened. It hasn't happened because the process is so ridiculously bureaucratic and so ridiculously infused with the old notions about how dangerous cannabis is and how important it is to stop anybody doing what they might think is good for themselves, when governments, of course, know better. So, despite those announcements, anyone who does not have a legal prescription for cannabis is committing an offence to use cannabis for medicinal purposes, to supply it to your friend or partner who might be in need of it, to cultivate it for that purpose, to produce various oils and tinctures. All of those activities remain criminal offences. In a practical sense, people who are charged with possession of cannabis, for example, who go to court and explain to the magistrate, most of these cases are magistrate court cases, go to court and explain that their usage was due to what's called medicinal purposes. The magistrates will listen to that, and depending on who the magistrate is and what your record is and various things, leniency might be expected, but can't, I suppose, be guaranteed. It will depend, in a practical sense, on the nature of the illness or condition that's being treated with cannabis. It would depend a little bit on whether that was accepted or not accepted or contested, I suppose, by the prosecution, and how much the magistrate would accept the legitimacy of that in a kind of factual sense. And it would depend on the kind of scale, I suppose, of the operation. There are certainly people in serious trouble for supplying medicinal cannabis, serious trouble as in looking at or experiencing, serving long jail terms. But for practical purposes, most people in this room, you would not be looking at jail, you'd be looking at maybe getting a fine, maybe getting a good behaviour bond, maybe having a conviction on your record for what might be best described as reasonably low-level offences involving reasonably small quantities, etc., of the substance. I've got some notes, I'm not going to bother looking The two other things to say. In New South Wales, it's all a bit different from state to state, but New South Wales, there's, as people will know, there are 3 trials occurring, cannabis trials occurring with state government approval. They're looking, I never remember what they're for, chemo patients, kids with epilepsy, and the one other I always forget, but there are 3 pretty limited trials going on. The people who are participating in those trials as patients have legal cannabis. So the kind of process that was being talked about by Therese earlier on, about applying and going through this and going through this and going to the Department of Health, sort of applies to those people, but there's been sort of shortcuts because of the medicinal clinical trials. So those people who are participating in those trials are the only people in New South Wales I'm aware of who are legally using cannabis for medicinal purposes. The general framework is that if you want to, and Therese went through this a little bit before, if you want to get legal cannabis under the so-called legal regime, you have to get a doctor, a specialist, to prepare a report to the Department of Health. The panel of experts in the Department of Health has to be satisfied that you have exhausted all other remedies. You have to provide clinical evidence of the effectiveness of the treatment that you're proposing. It's got to then be approved by the TGA, the Federal Government Authority. The Federal Government Authority will only say they will approve it for, forget their language, but for approved type of products, and raw cannabis is not approved. Cannabis oil that you can get reasonably easily around these parts, cannabis tincture you can get reasonably easily around these parts, none of them are approved. So the only approved form of cannabis approved by the government authorities is Sativex or Dropidanol, the two synthetic products. So you can go through a process, maybe you might get through it, you might get approved after 18 months or 2 years. This process has been in place since August 2016, so 18 months ago, and still yet to hear of anyone who's successfully gone through the process of getting approval to use a synthetic form of cannabis. The word absurd doesn't do justice. It's absolutely outrageous. And then we have all sorts of government ministers saying, oh yes, we're going to be world leaders in medicinal cannabis. You see that a few weeks ago? Gobsmacking. The Federal Minister for Health making announcements about how Australia's going to be a world leader providing medicinal cannabis, but could not point to a single person who is a single patient who is legally using cannabis today. There isn't any. Other than people, as far as I know, in those clinical trials, no one's been able to go through the process they've created after 18 months to get legal access on a very limited basis. So no wonder people are yelling at the moon. The other situation in New South Wales is for terminally ill patients. Terminal illness defined, I think, has been a life expectancy of 12 months. There's a scheme where you can register, you yourself as the patient and a carer, can register with a police register called the Compassionate something, forget the name of it. And if you're on that register, you're not legally able to use cannabis, but you are exempt from police action. That is, that the police will use discretion to not charge you. It's completely limited. You're allowed to have up to 15 grams of cannabis and not get in trouble. You're allowed to, a carer is allowed to supply 15 cannabis to their nominated carer. You are not able to do anything, have any higher quantity than that, and activities such as cultivation and so on are simply not covered, so you can't grow a single plant under that scheme. When I last checked, about a year or more ago there, I think there were 40 people, maybe 50 people in New South Wales on that register. A lot of people have said to me, is it safe? Do the cops just come around and bust you? It is safe. They do not come and bust you if you're on that register. They do not come and search your property. They do not come and see if you are growing a plant or two in the backyard, so it's safe in that sense, but it's just so limited, it's for practical purposes fairly useless. If you are in that unfortunate position of having a terminal illness and you want to apply, then I would recommend you do apply. If you want to see me about that later, I've even got a form with me today. There's some forms I can take you through that process, but for the great bulk of people, it's a useless gesture. A little bit insulting probably as well to many people who are suffering in many ways. Short version of my legal advice is that the legal, I'll say one thing, the legal consequences of using medicinal cannabis are very likely to be much, much less than the medical consequences of not using it. Most people, if you've got a good record, if you're trying to avoid the word I'm about to use. If you have a genuine medical condition and the evidence of that is pretty strong, that is, you've got some good medical reports, again from proper doctors, not GPs, etc., then the courts will look at that leniently. You can be guilty of an offence, this is the case in all states, guilty of an offence but have no conviction recorded against you, so you don't get a criminal record and you probably don't get a penalty. Different states have different arrangements about that. Queensland, for example, you can get fined and get no conviction. In New South Wales, if you get a fine, you do get a conviction, so it's either or nothing. But in New South Wales, you can be put on a bond and have no conviction recorded against you. Usually for first offenders, it's not just though for first offences, but a typical, if I could put it this way, a typical medicinal cannabis patient, someone using cannabis because they've got cancer, because they've got any number of conditions, and found in possession of a quantity of cannabis would be more likely than not to escape the legal system without a significant penalty. You might get a fine. If it's your second or third offence, you might get a fine. You might get a good behaviour bond. But it's not the patients who are going to go to jail, it's the people who are preparing the products and supplying the products. They're the people who are in real danger, because the legal system is looking at that group of people who are pretty heroic in my view, as criminals to be still hunted down and jailed. It's less of an argument to a judge about the medicinal application for a supplier or cultivator than it is for the patient or their immediate family, friends and so on who might be supporting those patients, those sick and deserving people. So overall, most people would be, in practical senses, safe in the sense of you're not going to go to jail. What you do have to go through, though, is the process. If you get busted, you have to go to court. You probably have to pay a lawyer. Legal aid might be available, might not be. You probably have to at least talk to your lawyer. You have to spend the time going to court, probably more than once. You have to spend the time talking to your lawyer, talking to maybe your friends about getting some character references. You have to talk to your doctor probably about getting some medical evidence. The doctor might say, oh, I don't want to talk about cannabis, I don't know if you're doing that, I don't you just say that, doctor, just tell them that I've got this condition that you've been treating me for 2 years, and I have got, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of drama, a lot of time, a lot of, it's problematic, but in the ultimate result, you would be likely to not go to jail. If you don't use the medicine, your health is likely to be much more compromised than the risk involved through the legal process. So that's my advice. If you think you need it, use the stuff. It works, doesn't it? So use it. If there's a legal consequence, talk to a lawyer. Don't be freaked out by the legal process. Lots and lots of people go through the legal process. It's not as bad as all that. It is when you first do it, but it's not as terrible as all that. And I think that, as I say, the message is don't kind of, in your own mind, get that consequence out of proportion. It's a nuisance and can be a bit expensive, but it's certainly not, in terms of particularly people with very, very serious conditions, it's certainly better than risking not getting the treatment that works for you. So that's a very, very short version. Happy to take questions. We're going to have a lunch break at some stage, and I thought we'd keep it short and have lots of questions because it's easier to address particular issues. Woman in the black. You'll probably have to yell. If you could stand up for acoustic reasons and talk loudly. Thanks.
You said in New South Wales you might just get away with medicine depending on the magistrate. Even so, if you purchase it, they would confiscate your supplies and any oil that you might have made.
That's right. For those who didn't hear that, the question in short was, you might get away with without the consequence of jail, but the medicine will be confiscated, and that is true. The police will take the stuff, and you don't get it back. We'll be a bit orderly, please. Someone was yelling.
In a roadside testing, are you obliged to leave the thing or to get the test? And are there things I've heard that happens
fishermen's friends, I'm told. I think most people heard the question. Even if, put it this way, even if you were a patient accessing cannabis legally with a prescription, if you somehow get through that process and you have a doctor who will prescribe you cannabis, even then you would still be open to that charge of driving with the presence of THC. The government has announced they have no intention at all of changing the driving rules. What we all expect is that as time goes on, the current government Australian suppliers will come into the market. But there are people who've now got licences, who've now got crops kind of ready to turn into products that will be available locally. So while it's outrageously slow, in the next year or two we'll have more and more and more people being able to eventually access legal cannabis. It will still be inadequate, but still some people get it. But the government has announced in that context that there is no intention to change that law at all. So you're as a driver, you are covered by the same rules. If you get stopped by police, asked to provide a saliva swab, if that shows THC, then you are guilty of the offence and you go to court on that driving offence, whatever the reason, whether it was because you want to have some fun or because you've got a serious condition that you were treating with cannabis. THC is the only thing they test for. My understanding, I'll let the more scientific people address this, but my understanding is that a lot of CBD products have some THC in them, so if you might think it's mostly CBD, it probably has some THC and you'd be liable there. Whole long sort of story about defences to that charge. If you think on reasonable grounds you did not have THC in your system, some good arguments maybe about that, but simply saying I use it for medicinal purposes is not a defence. And when you're asked to provide a sample, same with the drink driving breath test, if you refuse to provide the sample of saliva, that's an offence in itself and you're in more trouble than if you probably could provide the sample. Oh, apple cider. As a lawyer, I don't really give advice about whether apple cider vinegar or other things work. That's the word, that there are various ways of masking the presence of THC in your saliva. I've heard that works, I've heard a few other things work. It's a bit odd, idiosyncratic, as in some people seem to be test negative when they really think they should have been positive and so on. So there's all sorts of, what was Teresa's word, observational information, other than anecdotal information about how that works. So I've heard that does work, but I can't really say that it does. Someone yelled out outrageously over here before?
Oh, that wasn't me.
Wasn't you? But you can have a go.
Okay, could you please comment on the tension between the new industry and casino that's being developed and prohibition? And is there how could we proceed to bring that out as a total hypocrisy?
Again, I'll just summarise that question. Ask a comment on the interconnection between the new industry at casino, which people might know, I'll explain about that in a minute, and the current prohibition approach and so on. That's the fair way of summarising. The casino enterprise casino's not very far away from here. I suspect a lot of people in the audience aren't really local, but some months ago there was an announcement of a very large commercial operation being established at casino. Hasn't actually started yet, but they're about to start, and they're going to grow cannabis on a very large scale for medicinal purposes, and I think industrial as well, but certainly medicinal. It's in the context of the government announcing a process where you can, aside from the individual patients through their doctors, it's a very old school medical model, isn't it, anyway? Individual patients applying through their doctors to get prescribed a substance. The intention is that medicinal cannabis will be produced locally. The way they're doing that is also extraordinarily bureaucratic, but anyway, if you want to grow cannabis for medicinal purposes, you can apply for a licence. You have to do that, you have to have a manufacturer lined up. You can't be a manufacturer yourself. You've got to have someone organised who's not you to turn your weed into a tincture or an oil. You've got to have all sorts of good criminal record and good business backgrounds and so on and so on and so on. You've got to get a licence. Once you've got the licence, you then have to apply for a permit for each particular crop you put in. It's completely ridiculous. Anyway, but that process again started from about mid-2016, and there's now a few organisations starting to come through with fairly large-scale operations that are legal because they've got licences and so on. But at this stage, what is holding up any further, or the next step will be for, pardon me, the next step will be for those people to, with their manufacturing partners, to turn the raw material into some kind of product. Eventually, of course, what we'd like to see is, for goodness sake, this is just your cannabis, you know, we don't need to go through a doctor, don't need to go through a multinational company. All sorts of people can make cannabis oils and cannabis tinctures that are very effective. We're a long way from that situation, and the reason we're a long way from that situation is that the mindset about prohibition is still the dominant mindset. The government, although they will say, all sorts of government spokespeople will say, oh yes, yes, we have compassion for people suffering, yes, we think cannabis might work, yes, we're in favour of medicinal cannabis, we're going to be world leaders, don't actually get it. They are grudgingly, slowly making exceptions in their own mind to the prohibition model, and it's holding everything up. Sorry. About Tasmania, the question was about Tasmania. There's different. It's a these sort of changes, legal changes, are happening in different states at different paces. Victoria's been ahead of the game pretty much, and they're much further down the track than New South Wales or Queensland. I did see something recently about Tasmania having a company that's got a crop in, I think, and they're producing things. Don't know the detail of that, I'm sorry, but it's certainly happening in every state that people are producing cannabis under licence, so some people are able to do it legally, and eventually there'll be some product come onto the market, but it's slow.
Just getting back to the driving thing.
Yeah.
You found cannabis in your system most of the time. Do I understand what you said, that there would be no leniency in that case if you were taking it for medical purposes?
It's not a defence, put it that way. It's not a defence. Okay? It's an offence. Look, again, go back to Law 101. The way the system works is if the legislation says it is an offence to do A, B and C, then the court will approach on the basis of it's an offence, you've committed the offence. So what I call the elements. So the elements of the offence we're talking about under the Road Transport Act, New South Wales, is to be a driver and have in a oral fluid, saliva, the presence of THC. So 3 or 4 elements. There's got to be presence, THC, you've got to be a driver. So usually there's no issue about you're the driver. They stop you, you're behind the wheel, so you can't be, oh, my twin brother. No, it was me, okay. So there's no real issue about proving the driver. They take a sample, processes, they take a second sample at the police station or the bus, send that sample down to the lab to be tested by a proper scientist, an analyst. They write a report back, the analyst writes a report back to the police saying, we found the presence of THC. They don't give any indication of the level, just the presence of. That satisfies the legislation. When the cops get that one-page certificate back, they lay the charge. They send you out a court attendance, a summons, a court attendance notice to go to court. So if there's evidence of you being the driver, evidence of your oral fluid having THC present, you're guilty of the offence. It doesn't matter if the reason you have THC present is because doesn't matter. Okay? Then you go to the next stage of what penalty should you get, and you'll probably get a little bit of leniency from most magistrates about the medicinal aspect. But Section 10 is the section in New South Wales that allows you to have no conviction recorded on your first offence for the driving. So the first time you get stopped and test positive, probably you get Section 10, so you wouldn't get convicted, no conviction on that charge, therefore you don't get disqualified from driving, because the disqualification is linked to the conviction. Second offence, you can't get it again. So you get stopped a second time within a 5-year period, you get stopped a second time, again they can prove you're the driver, THC present in your saliva, you're guilty of the offence, probably, and you lose your licence for at least 3 months. Second offence, 6 months. So it's completely horrendous, really, but there's no exception for medicinal users. Yeah. Could you stand up? I can't hear you.
Category A.
Category A means what? I don't know what that means.
The doctors can prescribe under Category A, which is just a notification. Send it back to AGA, 24 hours.
don't know that that's correct. The overall framework of this is called the Special Access Scheme in terms of the legal prescription. Special Access Scheme has been around for a long, long time, so all sorts of experimental drugs and so on, you get access. People, doctors are able to prescribe unusual experimental new drugs, etc., through a Special Access Scheme. The Special Access Scheme. What they've done with cannabis is to kind of tack some stuff onto the Special Access Scheme. So there's various different ways. That scheme has a whole lot of different sort of elements to it. So the one for cannabis is, as Therese was explaining with that thing we all looked at, sort of 15 boxes you've got to jump through with all the fine print. You go through that process. In New South Wales, it's Schedule 8, sorry. The cannabis is on Schedule 8, so that allows doctors to prescribe subject to complying with all the rules, which includes approval by the Department of Health, not just a doctor, but the Department of Health, panel of experts, and the TGA. So, don't know about Category 8, don't know where that might fits in, but it's certainly there's a process.
Category A, family health patients only. It's a doctor's signature stating that they are notifying the TGA that you have been prescribed XYZ.
That's not my understanding. It's not as simple as that. It's just a acoustic thing. No one will hear you about. I have a job. It's okay. Yeah.
Please speak loudly so we can.
Yeah. Just ask people to stand. The easiest is just to stand up and ask the question. Yeah. Well,
Speak
Has it
loud.
ever been proven to adversely affect your driving?
yes and no. The question is, does cannabis adversely affect your driving? Is there proof of it? Yes and no. There are all sorts of studies that go a little bit each way. There are studies that show that people who have recently consumed cannabis for about an hour or thereabouts drive more carefully on simulated simulators and so on. A bit more cautious, a little bit more slower than other drivers and so on. There's also some evidence that reaction times are also delayed, so there can be contributing to accident causation through. If we did a survey of this room, we might form a particular view about how safe it is. My personal view is that it's relatively safe. That is, it's people mostly, when they have consumed recent consumption of cannabis, are in a pretty good position in terms of driving. My experience of people I know who smoke cannabis and then drive is they don't do it 2 minutes after they've had a smoke. They wait pretty sensibly until the immediate effectors, the strongest effect is worn off. So my observation of people in the community is that people self-regulate. There is certainly probably some cases of people who shouldn't be driving under the influence, but mostly it's safe enough. Government has a different view, fair enough I suppose. The offence of driving under the influence is a separate offence to driving with the presence of, so that's probably worth saying. So if the police can prove that there was some effect on your driving, that is you're driving too quickly, you went through a stop sign, you nearly ran someone over, that kind of thing, and there was evidence that you were intoxicated with alcohol or a drug, so red eyes, slurred speech, talking nonsense to the cops, might be evidence of intoxication, that's then the more serious charge of driving under the influence of a drug. Okay? Driving with the presence of a drug doesn't involve any evidence of it having an impairing effect. The scientific evidence of it, whether it does or doesn't impair, is a bit both ways. It goes, there is evidence that sometimes it does.
But the fact that they haven't proved that it's adverse to your driving, then could you use that as part of your defence?
No. That's what I was saying before. The legislation says it's an offence to ABC. If you do A, B and C, whether you agree or don't agree that it's sensible, doesn't really matter. That's where a lot of people, I think, in terms of the legal system, wonder why we haven't changed law. Why is this prohibition law been in place for 40, 50, 60, 70 years? It makes no sense. Yeah, that's right. But judges, even if they agree with that proposition that it makes no sense, are not able to say, this is a stupid law, I'm not going to apply this law.
So
they can't do that. They can't do that. Okay? It's up to the Parliament to make a law that says we're going to abolish that law and now make it lawful for anyone to use cannabis for any reason. Hallelujah when the day comes, but anyway, not just yet. Not just yet. Yeah, someone at the front.
2 questions.
when they take you back to the police station after you've done a saliva test, what's the second test? Is that a urine test or is that another saliva test?
No, saliva. The first, at the driver's window, when they stop you, they just do a swab. Okay, just do a quick swab. They throw that away. That's just a line, a blue line comes up or doesn't. Just shows it's an indicator. Okay. If it indicates a positive result, they take you back to the police station. Sometimes they've got a bus set up around the corner. They take you back and do a second sample, take a second saliva sample. They whack that into a machine called a Dragar, a sort of coffee machine type size thing. Put it in there, and then whatever the result, they're positive or negative, they send that same sample off to the lab for testing. If the Dragar machine says ping positive, you're told not to drive for 24 hours. They drive for 24 hours. If it's negative, you're free to go. More likely, it's 97% end up positive when they come back from the lab. So of the ones that test positive at the police station or bus, 97% are positive, so probably you'll get a court attendance notice. But if you're negative at the station, you're just allowed to go. If you're positive, you're told not to drive for 24 hours.
These other places that you're talking about coming online with the casino and that, are they CBD or are they THC cultivation?
I think they're both. I haven't really followed it. I think they're doing both. Other people know more than me about that.
This lady,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
sure.
Mine's just a simple one. On the swab test,
Yep.
do they pick up THCA as well as THC?
No. The offence is THC. Okay, the way they wrote the law, THC, not cannabis, not other. It's got to be THC. So. Well,
If there's no THC in it.
Can I say something on that? Michael? Just something on that. Look, even when, as soon as you pick the plant and hang it up to dry, some conversion starts to happen.
Yeah, but if you pick the plant, put it straight into a juicer, drink the juice.
I reckon that's pretty cool. Yeah. I reckon that's pretty cool. But the test is shit.
Every plant.
The test is not really good. And like Steve says, if you get through to that third test, you're done, really. And it's a bit random, but I think you'll be okay. But just out of interest, he can't tell you, but I can tell you hippies around here, they clean their teeth well. They put a fisherman's friend on the counter and the dashboard. Okay, nothing's guaranteed. I'm just telling you what they do. Orange juice, citrus is good, they say. Milky coffee is good, some people say. Chocolate is good, anything is good. It's not that good a test, but there's no guarantees.
I was just wondering whether it would pick up THCA.
Possibly. No.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, if it's
He's
THC.
right, it's meant to be just THC.
If I put it this way, the law says it's an offence to drive with the presence of THC, full stop, okay? The testing, if it came back from the lab saying there is THC present in your saliva, and you thought, no, that's not right, I'm sure I haven't had any THC, I've just had THCA. Come and see me, maybe we'll run a case about it. But you might have an argument. This gets very, very technical and a bit boring for people in a sense, but there's an argument about honest and reasonable mistake as a defence for those charges, okay? So if you honestly believe that you did not have THC in your system, and there was a reasonable basis for that belief, you can't just have an honestly held belief that's crazy. It's got to have a reasonable basis, then there's a defence. Okay? So we ran a case a year or two ago about a fellow who was 9 days between the time he had a smoke and when he was stopped. He said, I was sure that it would have been out of my system within after the 9 days. The magistrate believed him that it had been 9 days, hadn't been smoking that 9-day period. And the magistrate said, well, you're not guilty because you had an honest belief and had a reasonable basis for that. We had an expert that said, no, after 9 days, it should be gone. It did appear in his system, so he might have been lying, but it did appear in his system. More likely, the system picks up, despite what they were intending to do, picks up traces of THC, long time, days and days and days after you've had a smoke or whatever you might have used, a tincture on your tongue. And the magistrate, though, accepted that he had an honest belief and a reasonable basis for that belief. Okay? So in your case, if you were absolutely sure you had THC only, because of raw plants and so on, absolutely sure about that, and you had a reasonable basis for that, that is, you've done some research and so on, you might have an argument. And it could be that the testing is just wrong in a sense, or the testing is right, but you were pretty sure you would have been safe as far as that law was concerned. Okay, that makes some sense. Fill at the back and then we'll come to you.
Yes, well, if the test is unreliable and it is crap, like you read in a lot of the opinions people express, it's a crap test, how seriously, or why do they take it so bloody seriously? Because the little word.
I never asked the question to start with why. I don't know. I don't know. Because the government passed a law. I mean, the short answer is the government passed a law.
But
Not everybody in the...
The test is wrong. Okay, the law is fine, but if the test is picking up stuff that it shouldn't be picking up,
I fully agree.
Is that the
There's been no proper research on the test. No research at all. We are the only country on earth doing this test which is so extreme, just for in a minuscule amount. We are being so bullied by the police in Australia. It's interesting. We are really bullied by the police.
Yeah, we are. Can I say something? I'd like to say something.
I forgot apple cider vinegar, very popular.
And biotin gel. Hey, but listen, just think about this scenario where you have a car crash, right? And the first people on the scene are the ambulance people. And they actually give you cannabis because cannabis has been shown to protect your head from neurological damage and injuries. That's a neuroprotective.
You're having a future vision.
Well, I'm just reversing your RDT scenario that, yeah, we could actually be saving lives instead of bloody
One
testing.
day soon, all paramedics will be equipped with the life-giving herb. First thing they can do.
Yeah, like, instead of giving you fentanyl, just here's a bit of cannabis. I mean, honestly, that's the world we need to live in.
It's the world kind of living, kind of, but not really. Yeah, sorry.
What's the difference between THCA and THC?
I'll give you a lawyer's non-science answer. THCA is THC acid. It's present in cannabis and it turns into THC when you apply heat to the molecule adds an atom or loses an atom or something. There's some chemical procedure. If you were inclined to smoke cannabis, burning it turns the THCA that's sort of present in the plant into THC. That's where you get the buds. That's why if you just ate a bud, nothing happens. Yeah. Recommend you don't eat a bud, it's a waste of a bud. Nothing happens by if you cook it, you convert it into THC. So yes, THC acid is the kind of raw product. I think there is, Michael's right, there's THC as well in the plant, but at fairly low levels. A lot of it is the THCA that's converted in the process of heating it in whatever way you want to heat it.
Can they measure the amount when they do the test?
They can, but they don't. There's no reason why they can't measure. Of course they can, but they're not required to, and they're having 100,000 of these a year to test, so the poor old laboratories are overrun, overwhelmed by all these testing to do. If they don't have to do the extra step of testing purity, then they don't. They just churn out the certificates present.
Is there a period of days, that you said that fellow 9 days, that you would say was sort of a safe period that you would...
It's a very, very common experience. I do a lot of work at Lismore Local Court. Monday is the day at Lismore Local Court. Some days at Lismore Local Court we have literally 30, 40 people charged with driving with the presence of THC. A lot of those people say 2 days, 3 days before, effect worn off. I don't think everybody tells the truth, okay? But I also don't think everybody lies. So a large proportion of those people are telling the truth, that it's been days and days and days between when they've had a smoke and when they've been driving the car, and the sensitivity of the test is so low, picks up such small traces, that it picks up people who've got zero impact in terms of their driving capacity, absolutely zero effect, but they're still caught. And my view is it's a majority of people, probably a large majority of people who are caught by that rule, who are in fact not under the influence at all, and they're not charged with that because they're charged with presence.
So hemp seed oil has no THC?
No. And if you were... Hemp seed, again, I'm no kind of scientist. Hemp seed itself, I believe, has no THC, but the husk does. Okay. So in the process of dehusking, the little hemp seed you eat on your cereals, I do, little bits of leaf, little bits of husk are probably still present in it. So you're probably going to get a little bit of THC, not enough to affect you, but probably a little bit of THC. If you consume a lot of seed, you'll probably get a little bit of THC, possibly enough to trigger the saliva test as a result. Again, in terms of that defence of honest and reasonable mistake, we've run cases. People have sworn on Bibles, that's all I've done, don't smoke, I've just used this oil, it must have got in that way. The magistrate has believed that, as the honesty of the person telling giving that version, and the reasonable basis for what they've done. They didn't just think, oh, that's going to be okay. They had to also take some steps, doing some research, reading a book. You know, we have books still. Read a book, go to the internet, go to Google, find out, go to seminars like this, find out information about it, and if you've got some kind of basis for your belief that's reasonable and not just I want to believe this because that's what I believe, then you're on good ground in terms of argument if you can convince the magistrate that you have not consumed cannabis for ages, as in the ordinary way. Oh, sorry. That's right. Remarkably, it's been illegal to eat hemp seed in Australia and New Zealand until a month or 2 or 3 ago. So now, legal.
I want to tell you more there. So it was the police who've kept hemp seed illegal. One of the reasons they thought it sent the wrong message, but they also said it would interfere with saliva testing. So you just heard him say it doesn't interfere. I'm not sure about that. I think if you carry a packet of hemp seed in your car when you're driving, it could be really handy.
Michael's getting glasses off then. Astute. Yes.
Can I just clarify? So earlier you said CBD oil can have THC in it. Is that correct?
Sorry,
so earlier you mentioned that CBD oil could have the THC in it.
Yeah.
However, you also mentioned that it needs to be heated to have the THC. So
because my understanding of the production of the oil involves some kind of application of heat.
Oh, it does.
So I don't do it, but I know. I think the afternoon is going to be spent people explaining in some detail how to convert raw material into other things. So maybe that question would be asked of someone who knows more about the actual process. But my understanding is it does involve a process. You'll do.
Is there any evidence that when you apply THC topically, even if it's like in a balm, that it gets into the bloodstream and will still register on a saliva test?
All I can say is I've had a client who had that experience of using, she made her own hemp oil, that is she got weed and turned it into an oil. She created her own product and she rubbed it on as an ointment. She had cancer some years ago and she was sure in her own mind that rubbing this cannabis cream on was keeping the cancer at bay. She knew that for about 10 years. She was stopped and tested positive. We ran the honest and reasonable belief defence. The magistrate believed her that she'd have been months. I mean, she said, I sometimes smoke, but it'd been months since the last time. He believed her about that. He believed that she had made suitable inquiries about the effect itself. Whether it did. She thought it didn't pass through her skin. That's what she thought. She thought, she said, I make it myself. I had a mouthful every now and again, and when I eat it, I get stoned. When I rub it on my skin, I don't get stoned. So I was pretty sure it doesn't pass through. There's no THC getting through. That was kind of a bit convincing that she was honest about saying, well, I've never smoked, I just didn't do it on the day, weeks and weeks before. Anyway, there's a lot of sort of detail about her case that was convincing enough to the magistrate. So I don't know if that's evidence, but that's an observation of one client who said that's how she got caught by that system, and that was all that she was doing, I believe, to the magistrate did too. One at the back. Sorry, being Brandon here.
Aside from going through the courses, obviously if people are using for medical purposes, do they involve, if you've got children, do they involve things like family services or any of that? Or is your fantasy possession?
Sorry, I didn't hear
I think it's a doc. Is this a doc's question?
Yeah.
About epileptic children, for example?
Yeah, if
it's a very good question.
And you're found in possession for medical purposes, do they commonly involve docs?
It's a good question.
It is a good question. I can't really answer that question by saying, yes, it's common. One feature of the docs process is, for good reasons, it's all confidential. So children's court proceedings are not published. No, the general public doesn't go. The newspapers don't go and report. So you very, very rarely hear about children's court cases, which is where hundreds of kids are removed from their parents every year, thousands really. Some of those cases possibly do involve cannabis. Earlier speakers, I think Deb was saying she knew of some people that Deb spoke earlier today. I don't know of anyone. I haven't come across a case where people have had their children removed or threatened to be removed because of medicinal cannabis, but I'm sure it's happened.
It's definitely happened. I can say something quickly.
I just can't be precise because I don't know any details of any particular case.
I think it's a really good question. There definitely has been some children intervention with dogs, but it's usually, I think, with children who are really quite sick and they're really terrified someone will die and they'll get sued or blamed or something. But it's a very touchy area, and my recommendation is don't tell government officials. I don't think it's worth, because they're in the awkward position. It's a bit like the police. There's good guys in the police, and they're definitely giving discretion in New South Wales to medical cannabis users. I don't know about other states. They're the meat in the sandwich. But if you make it difficult for them, they have to do something. If the neighbour rings up and dobs them in, they kind of have to do something. And I think it's the same with children. Well-meaningly tell some social worker, I'm doing this, I'm giving, cannabis to my child, and it's fantastic. They probably have to report it. So you just got to shut up sometimes.
I guess I mean more if the parent is the one that's using it for medicinal purposes, not the children.
Same. It's illegal. It's black and white to them.
I'd agree with that advice about just keeping it to yourself, pretty much. Just on the parental use of cannabis, there was a Supreme Court case in New South Wales a couple of years ago now where the parent appealed, but took the case to the Supreme Court. Slightly different process, but nonetheless. And that was a case where New South Wales docs have been involved in removing, I think, a couple of kids from the family, from the parents. There were a number of issues. I don't know all the details, but there were some problems with the parenting about accommodation and a few other things. So parents have worked through ticked off all the boxes, as it were. They've done this, they've done that, they've done all the things that were identified by docs as a problem, except they had not stopped using cannabis. Okay? The details, I think, were the docs then said, well, you can't have your kids back for another 6 weeks until we're sure about something else. The parents took it to the Supreme Court. The judge said, those kids are back with their parents tomorrow. It was a Friday. He said, if they're not back by lunchtime tomorrow, ring me up, I'm going to come back to court and sit again, and the department can come and tell me why they haven't returned those kids, because there's absolutely no reason why cannabis use itself, in this particular case, is any indication of harm being done to those children. Okay? So a very, very strong rhetoric from a judge in the Supreme Court saying, he also said in the same judgment, if that's the law of New South Wales, that cannabis users can have their children removed, then you, the department, should be going to every newspaper and every TV station tomorrow and make sure the population of New South Wales knows that children are going to be removed if their parents use cannabis. Very, very strong rhetoric. And it's good law. So simply, yes, just cannabis, yes, very strong argument. I do a bit of work in the Children's Court, and cannabis and other drug use is often a feature, but rarely the only feature of the problems in the parenting. If there's no more hands, we have lunch, but we can have hands, we have whatever we want to do. We're this sort of group. Put them at the back in the shadows.
Could you please just tell me what potential consequences if I'm called driving cannabis and I don't lose my licence?
Yes. Yes, you won't go to jail. The maximum penalty is a fine. Okay? If it's your first offence, depending on your traffic record, first offence, you are more likely, well, you've got a good chance of having no conviction recorded, and therefore you don't lose your licence. Conviction is a status thing. If you're found guilty of an offence, more often than not, you are then convicted of that offence. It goes on your record, but the judge or the magistrate does not have to proceed to conviction. Okay? So if it's your first offence, relatively minor offence, etc., good chance of having no conviction recorded. The legislation says if you're convicted, you must lose your licence first offence for at least 3 months. Second offence or later offences at least 6 months, okay, on conviction. So first time, good chance of getting no conviction, so therefore you keep your licence. Second time, no chance. You get convicted because you must be convicted within 5 years.
And I also been bound to tell my employer
Depending on your situation, you might have to, because if you're involved, if you're required to drive at work, sorry boss, I can't drive for the next few months. Why that? Oh, well, had a bit of a problem. So hard to avoid sometimes. But other than that, you don't have. There's no rule that says you have to tell your employer about any criminal charges you might have. Really. Welcome.
There's a lady in the middle somewhere.
Sorry, would that be shown up on your police record check if you're going to work for a government department and you have regular police record checks? That of course
It is, yes. The language sometimes used no conviction recorded as if that means there's no record. There is a record of the no conviction being recorded, if you like. So the criminal history shows Section 10 of the Section New South Wales, the offence, the dates about the charge, date, the court date, and so on. Section 10, Section 10 of the bond, Section 10 dismissal. So it's there, but yes, in the common language it's not recorded, but as a conviction there is a record of the non-conviction. Over here first.
What would be your advice to somebody who is busted, so to say? A medical user busted? Do the police press for the supplier? And if they ask about the supplier, what should one say?
Don't say anything.
Can you repeat the
Don't
question?
repeat the question.
No, well,
Give
if
me
you
a
say
name
that,
and
the
a
police
date.
are going to say, tell us the name of the supplier.
Don't.
Yeah.
Don't. Just don't. Don't tell them.
What do you have to tell them, Steve?
You do.
Do they, as a matter of practice, do they press you about who your supplier is or who gave this to you?
Let's have some audience participation. Put your hand up if you've heard the expression, the right to silence. Most people have. Right? What that means is, for that to have any meaning, real meaning, it means that the police cannot go to court and say he, she wouldn't answer our questions. They must be hiding something. We asked who the supplier was, he wouldn't tell us. He must know he wouldn't tell us. We asked him if this was his policy, he wouldn't answer the question. They can't. That's what the right to silence means. They can't use the fact that you haven't answered a question or exercise your right to silence in any way against you. They can't make an argument to the court that he must have something, she must be hiding something because you wouldn't answer the questions. Okay? That's what the right to silence means. It includes your own personal behaviour. You don't have to say, that's mine, you did that, yep, that's mine. You don't have to say that. You can say nothing. You certainly don't have to go beyond that of saying, where you got it from, how much you paid for it. Police will ask you, they're always keen to find out, but you don't have to answer that question and they can't use it against you. Movies, TV, etc. often give misleading information about the legal system. They changed the law in the UK a few years ago. So when you're watching English crime cop shops, the warning they give, if you don't tell us this, we'll tell the judge. That's an English law, not an Australian law, or an American law for that matter too. So American cops shows are pretty safe, a little bit. English cop shows give the wrong impression out because the English law has been changed.
Oh, Steve,
Yeah.
could I just make a bit of a public service announcement?
Sure.
So some people in Nimbin, local, particularly women, have refused to do the drug test, the RDT, when they've been pulled up. They've said, no, I don't want that in my mouth, or no, I don't want to take the test because I don't believe in it. And they have been physically arrested. So harassed and arrested, and they've had no grounds to come back on it. So just a bit of advice, that if you are in the line to do an RDT, just do it and be polite, and then deal with whatever the circumstances are when you present to court. Don't really think about how you're going to present it, and on what legal grounds. But don't defy the police at that point. There's absolutely no point in doing it. They just get angry.
Well, the penalties are worse by not cooperating with the police.
I'd agree. And aside from that, you might test negative anyway. Don't assume you're going to be positive.
If you're in an accident, how does it affect, and then you're of course tested because you're in an accident, how does it affect your insurance?
If you're in an accident, they take blood samples. Okay, so if you've got to go to hospital, they'll take a blood sample, or they can require to have blood. So we're talking about a slightly different regime. If you're with insurance, if you're found to be, most insurance policies will have a clause that says your insurance is invalid if you are in an accident involving drugs or alcohol. So most insurance policies would have a clause to get the insurance company out of paying you, and you would be up for your own expense of repairing the other person's car, whatever it might be in terms of insurance.
The HC will show up in the blood test?
Oh yeah, test will show up in the blood test, yeah. Well, like, if it was there, it would show up, and the blood tests show what's there.
And even if it's not there, it will still
Yeah. With the, it's slightly different to the saliva testing thing we're talking about, because with the blood test they do show a concentration of the drug that's present, so they give you some kind of indication about whether it's a little bit or a lot, and a little bit you might have an argument in terms of the offence of driving under the influence. You might be able to say, well, yeah, but it was from days ago, there was no influence, maybe. Okay. But as far as the insurance is concerned, they take, I think, a much harder line to say, no, it was there. Whether you're guilty or not guilty, as far as the police charge is concerned, we're going to cancel your licence or your insurance because you had the drug or alcohol present. Yeah, Philip.
They don't make any distinction between medicinal use or recreational use if you get busted in legislation. So, in turn, that's effective then is a difficult person for lots of firearm licences and any other.
No, you don't lose your firearms licence if you get a drug conviction. Some violence offences you do, but not for drugs. I'm not really a kind of firearms kind of regulation expert, so I don't know all the rules and regs.
A general, obviously, government's opinion of being a proper person for,
You definitely in Queensland. You definitely lose it in Queensland.
Yeah, I'm from
The people who are in charge, believe it or not, there are people in charge of this exercise. One more question, and then anyone else talking, I'll be outside for a little while. Woman, I think, in the middle, and then otherwise private conversation. And everyone else can have lunch. Last question.
So if you are pulled over for drug poisoning, are you best to say, if it tests positive, are you best to say
Always difficult to sort of answer a question in that way. Now, what should I say? You're entitled to say nothing. So start from that point of view. If you say, I use it medicinally, it's not going to really help a lot in terms of the driving charge, because it doesn't kind of matter whether you did what you did before. What you tell the police is written down on a summary sheet called the fact sheet. Sometimes I think laughingly called the fact sheet, but you know what they say the facts. Anyway, but they'll record, in these saliva test cases, pretty routine kind of tick a box sort of type when they fill it in. So they'll show the time, the date, the reg number, etc. of your car, and anything that you say to them. Okay. So when they do the test, if you say nothing, they just say, she said nothing, she made no comment. If you say, I had a smoke 2 days ago, what are you doing? She said, I had a smoke 2 days ago, what are you doing? If she said, I use cannabis medicinally, she said, I use cannabis medicinally. Whatever you say, that will be likely to be put in front of the magistrate. So this is a kind of legal practitioner's view. If you say nothing, you've got more of a chance to build a case without telling lies about things. More of a chance to put your case to the court when you've had some time to get legal advice about how you're going to present it, rather than what you say to the police front up. So for driving cases or any case, possession cases, cultivation cases, the general thing you should have in your mind is you don't have to say anything and say as little as possible. If you're sure you're going to be able to talk your way out of it, okay, go for it, you're allowed to. But a lot of people are sure they can talk their way out of things, maybe not so well, end up in trouble. So if in doubt, say nothing and simply say, I'm not going to answer any questions or don't want to make any comment, officer. Politeness is always good, I'm polite, everyone should be polite. So you can be polite without actually giving anything away. And then you can still go to court, you probably might still have to go to court and tell something to the, say the magistrate, why use it medicinally, that's when it matters. Okay? It doesn't really matter whether you say yes or no to the police, it's what you say to the court. You get credit, a discount, for pleading guilty at the first opportunity if you're on a charge. First opportunity to plead guilty is in court, not with the cops, in court. That's why it's difficult. Sometimes if you think, well, this cop might let me go if I use medicinally, Michael's correct. Some of the local police are a bit better than some other local police, so you might be lucky. The difficulty is once you've said it, and if they test you and you're positive, there will be a record. Okay.
But hang on,
One more question.
But this conversation wants to go on and on because everybody's so anxious about being caught on the roads, right? It's a big topic. And I know you can catch Steve on the road as well. You can talk to him. But I think the take-home message is what I'm getting from you, Steve, is that essentially if the cops are talking to you, just don't talk to them. Just keep quiet. And remember that anything you say to them can be used in a court of law against you because they're not your buddies. And then build your case up when you go to court, if that day arrives. And just remember that if you're in the Silver Fox team, that is age 50 plus, then you don't care about consequences too much, because for a first-time offence, they're not going to hurt you. They just want 200 bucks. They just want 500 bucks, pay the fine. It's a business. That's all. Yeah. So that's it. And go to your GP and get them to write a letter to say, I know my client's using cannabis for health. You know, do all the right things, okay? But that's civil activism. Okay. We need to be on the road.
We need to wrap up because there's a lot of good people going to say sensible things all afternoon, and you didn't enjoy lunch. We all enjoyed lunch. So thanks for being here. I'll be outside. Stay cool. Ooh.
Listen, just before you go, you're really right to worry about the saliva testing. It's become a huge issue in our community. It is a below-the-belt act, the police know, but there's a few good stories. I know someone who did talk to the police. Anyway, he came up positive and he gave the police this huge talk, and you know, I only have one little toke in the morning because I'm a terrible driver without it. And the copper went back and did another test and said, no, you're right, mate. So it actually happened. So he's right not to talk to the cops, but I think a letter from your doctor is not going to hurt. And I think if you really do come up positive and you're gone, if you know, you're a medical user, mate, I'd be dangerous. I'll have a seizure if I don't, buddy will have my medicine. Really, imagine it. So it's a difficult issue. You know, from our experience, I don't think the balm registers. I don't think CBD registers. And I think THC with minimal THC doesn't register. But for all of them to work, you need that entourage effect with a tiny bit of THC in it. So you just got to be game for it. Clean your teeth.
Clean your teeth anyway.
And listen, if you want to get our weekly headlines, put your email address here. That'd be great. And we're going to have a proper break now, have some lunch, talk to the juicing people under the tree, or the people in that area are all medicine makers. And when you come back, we'll set it up and we're going to do demos here. Thanks heaps, guys.
What time back, Steve? What time back?
3/4 of an hour. What's the time now? 3 o'clock.
If we drink the juice, will we be okay?
You'll be cool.
Guaranteed.
Maybe a bit before 3. Oh, Brian, I've forgotten Brian. We'll talk after.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brian.